The world just took a big step toward compensating countries hit by deadly floods, heat, and droughts with the creation of a fund to help compensate countries struggling to cope with loss and damage caused by climate change. This has been described as a major first-day breakthrough at this year's UN Climate Conference. Some countries started putting in money right away, including the United Arab Emirates, committing $100 million to the fund. Other countries stepped up with big-ticket commitments, including Germany, also at $100 million. Developing nations had long sought to address the problem of inadequate funding for responding to climate disasters caused by climate change, which hit them especially hard, and for which they have little responsibility. Industrialized countries have spewed out carbon emissions, trapping heat in the atmosphere. But many details of the loss and damage funds were left unresolved, such as how large it would be, who would administer it, and more. Joining me for more on this is Chigozie Nweke-Eze, the CEO and founder, Integrated Africa Power, IAP, and visiting fellow European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you for joining me today, Chigozie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right. I'd like us to start this conversation from, the lowest point, really. There was a time when climate change conversations felt like a hoax to a lot of people. And for them, the issues were probably exaggerated or overstated. Now, looking at where we are now, do you think that narrative has changed?
Yes, of course. A lot of work has been done to change the narrative. So, of course, we are no longer at that basic level of denial. But, of course, this, of course, also depends on the governments that come, especially in the leading countries for this climate movement. So changing governments can actually still kind of behave in a way of drawing us back. But the governments we have in the US and other parts of the leading world are also mainly governments that believe in the effects of climate change. And that's also one of the reasons why we are seeing some of these improvements.
Well, the launch of this particular fund has been described as a breakthrough by many, including even Sultan Al Jaber, who is the president of the COP28 climate conference in Dubai. But for you, is that what it is and why?
Of course, this fund was first announced at COP27 in Egypt. COP28 is just was a movement to kind of actually actualize that. That is to actually endow it. And as you've just mentioned in your briefing, the total endowment is now standing at $260 million US. And of course, it gives a sense of relief to people in the developing countries that yes, this is actually actualized, and it's a very good start in this particular COP that this is announced, because of course this is an announcement that is peculiar to many African countries at the same time who are also part of developing countries, because it will help them to solve the impacts of climate change. As I've said earlier, these developing countries, including African countries, most of them are going to bear most of the brunt of climate change, although they contributed really little to it. And so setting up a climate fund like that, like this one we've seen now, is a way of justice, climate justice, of saying, yes, we bear the responsibilities of causing this damage, and we want to begin to compensate for it. So this is a start, but of course, it is expected that this becomes much better. One of the discussions that is going on now is to have a situation whereby you have an annual contribution of about $100 million US every year by the countries that have committed to this. Right now, that has not been completely finalized, and also the possibility of this happening is also not yet 100% defined. And this is why we need to clarify this. We need to have it come yearly. And of course, what is being defined already that is required is about $300 million US per year for all developing countries. So of course, having what we have now is a start, but we need to make it yearly to make sure that we cushion the effects, the impact that the climate change is already having in some countries, while at the same time also making efforts to defossilize and have more renewable means of energy generation.
Well, I'm trying not to be pessimistic, but then there was a Green Climate Fund that was first proposed at the 2009 climate talks I was in Copenhagen, and it began raising money in 2014. And that has not even come close to its goal, you know. And now there is another. So how first, let's establish how these funds differ from each other, and then maybe what more we need to know about the Green Climate Fund so far.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, there has been so many funds, Green Climate Fund, the Clean Investment Facility, including CDMs. All these funds and mechanisms have been set up in the past, and they sought to deliver to their aims. They did it to some extent, but not did not actualize their full potentials. And I think one can learn, these new funds that are coming up right now can actually learn from lessons and the mistakes of other ones. One thing that is peculiar about this particular loss and damage fund is that it is going directly into the direction of loss and damage, that is on climate adaptation. We had adaptation fund for a long time, which didn't do so much. And right now, this one is directly is more structured in a way that targets developing countries, structured in a way that targets countries that are most affected in developing countries. And so it is expected that this particular one would deliver, learning from the lessons that from other experiences of past mistakes of other mechanisms and funds, and be able to cover this gap that we want to find here, which is making sure that the effects of climate change, which is already happening today in terms of drought, in terms of flooding, that this is actually cushioned in the countries that are especially poorer than the rest, that this helps them to cushion and help them to adapt to climate change effect.
All right. Well, while we understand that Africa contributes little to all of this, but then our efforts by African countries to address climate change issues commensurate with the damage and loss that, you know, Africa currently experiences, especially when we talk about drought and some other things. We've seen the devastating effects of all of this in Africa and how it's even affecting the economy. So do you think it's commensurate really at the end of the day?
Well, of course, it's not commensurate, but at least it's better to do something than not. As you've mentioned very clearly, African continent as a whole, consisting of 56 countries, contributes less than 4% of the global emission. Most of that number actually comes really from South Africa because of coal. So if you remove South Africa from the equation, you may have something like 1% or 1.5% from the rest of the countries. So it's really little and minute what is being contributed. And of course, it is only fair. Geography made it so that most of the effects would now be felt by African countries because most of them are also located at the fringes, right? Where droughts can affect them, where flooding can affect them. It's just geography. And so it is fair for countries who have historically contributed to this CO2 in the atmosphere, namely especially US and China and the EU, takes up that responsibility of beginning to make up for some of these effects. Of course, it's not going to be commensurate, but at least doing something significant would be welcome. Otherwise, it will create broader problems. I mean, of course, the effects of climate change goes beyond just the environment. It comes into the political scene. It causes violence and conflicts. I mean, of course, once there is drought and people are hungry and losing jobs, they come to the streets. This has a direct effect also on political stability of those countries. It has effects on the economy and the GDP. It has so many effects. So it's important to know the effects of this. And of course, some of these effects of climate change causes displacement and migration, both within the country, regionally, or even outside. And so some of these immigration issues that we are also hearing about can also be curbed when climate change effects are actually being curbed within those countries. And so that's why this kind of loss and damage funding is welcome. What we hope, of course, is that it will come to a point where it will be dispersed in a very efficient way without wasting much time and removing all inefficiencies we see the complexities to this. Most countries who will have to donate this, I mean, what the numbers you see are just promises. And of course, it's one thing to promise, then it's another thing to deliver.
Let me come
Processes
in
for
here,
delivery.
Chigozie. I like what you said about how that these are just promises. Now, of the over $400 million that was raised, you talked about the role that U.S. plays in all of this. And somehow, disproportionately, I would say, U.S. only committed to $17.5 million. What does that even say?
Yeah, of course, it's not sufficient enough, right? So more has to be done. But I was just referring to how difficult it is also. This to actually disburse these funds, these individual countries need to go. These institutions need to go through their parliaments, and their parliaments have to allow it to happen. So it's one thing to promise it and to bring it forward. It's another thing to actually push for it to happen and to see it happen fast. Of course, it may be understandable why the US may start a bit smaller just to see it happen first. But of course, ultimately, it is encouraged that more of these countries, especially US, China, and the EU, put more commitment in seeing that this actually happens, that more fund is put in, and this is efficiently going into the countries that they are supposed to get into, and that this is doing the job it's supposed to do.
All right, talking about this loss and damage fund, I just want to put this out there. You know, this fund is to take care of devastating impacts. And then what are we doing about probably phasing out fossil fuel, which is responsible for what we are currently seeing? It feels like much of the conversation goes into ameliorating, goes into mitigating and all of that. What happens to probably putting an end to it? What's stopping the world from, getting to that point? What are the issues? What are, the potential issues here?
Yeah, I mean, there are some potential issues relating to this. Of course, one of it is the challenge of balancing different priorities. Of course, I'll use Nigeria as an example. Nigeria is also an oil and gas producing country, but it's battling with energy access. At the same time, the country has also committed to climate change mitigation, right? So it's a dilemma. How do you solve the electricity access gap while at the same time also solving the climate mitigation effects? So it's a dilemma. So countries want to first of all prioritize their energy security, which is of course very much linked to economic growth and economic development. And climate mitigation is also something that countries are beginning to take much more seriously right in the last years, but more work needs to be done. So just to give you a sense of why countries are still working on fossilization. But at the same time, one question that comes up, particularly also in this COP, is the issue of unabated fossil fuel. So the people are now coming up with a new term of unabated fossil fuel because there is a technology of now capturing the CO2 carbon that is supposed to be emitted by fossil fuel. So if countries are able to put up a technology to capture this waste so that it doesn't go into the atmosphere, they have also one way or the other achieved cleaner environment, right? So this is also something that is being put forth by oil and gas producing countries. Of course, as you know, this COP is hosted by an oil and gas producing country, UAE. So of course, this kind of innovations is expected because of course, UAE is one of the example of a country that would not easily give up the production of oil and gas. So these are the trends that you're seeing. Countries that do not want to give up completely fossil and oil and gas, fossil fuels in general, may come up with innovative terms of capturing it in there whether it doesn't go into the atmosphere.
All right, Chigozie.
Yeah.
Let me come in here, just to wrap up this conversation. What for you is the right way to go? Should we listen to those who are saying, okay, we can do something about it, we can address it, we can capture it so it doesn't get into the environment? What for you is the way to go? Looking at energy poverty in Africa and some other issues, really.
Yeah, I think that one way to go is really to begin to take a serious global stock take. Of course, this COP has been referred to the first COP that would do a global stock take of what each of the countries have been doing. So in the previous COPs, countries come and make promises, but not much has been done in holding them by their promises. So I think that serious global stocktake is very important. That can also be published and made public, so that people also hold their governments accountable, and people see which countries are making which efforts, which people are actually backing what they promise with actions. I think this is important, and this would also improve the way of delivery of each of the countries.
All right.
Another thing is, I think all of these things needs to come together, both climate mitigation, construction of renewable energy technologies, technologies that also capture this waste from going into the atmosphere, funding. All of these things need to all come together for us to achieve our goals.
All right. Thank you so much, Chigozie. There's a whole lot to talk about on this, but we hope that we'll get to talk about it some other time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Have a great day.